Hello, it's Deborah from the Attic, and today we're going to be working with Craftex. I'm going to show you how you can use different techniques to really get the most out of this versatile and very flexible, totally natural vegan product. It behaves like leather. You can manipulate it in all kinds of different ways. I'm going to show you how we're going to make these 3 items. We have a tag which is embossed and has a whole reinforcement that is textured on the top there. We have a little journal that has a closure mechanism, and then we have another journal where the emphasis is on the effects that you can create by embossing Craftex, and I will quickly show you how to make this little journal. If you haven't already, please subscribe to make sure that you get notifications every time a new video is loaded. If you do subscribe, please let me know in the comment section below, because then I will give you a shout out and a personal welcome to the attic, and I will also provide links to the products that I use below the video. If you've seen many of my videos before, you will know how much I love Craftex, and I use an awful lot of it. Usually I buy it on a big roll like this. This is too long for me to really show you all of this detail, but this is a smooth version of Craftex. This colour is stone. I also have it in tan, but the nice people at C&T Publishing have sent me 3 colours to try, and these are pre-washed. So these have got a little bit more texture to them. I think this one, the denim one, shows it the most easily. I mean, that just looks beautiful. I'm really excited to use these. I have denim, linen and white, and I will be doing some projects using all of these colours in future videos. Today we're going to concentrate on the linen one. In each of these packs you get an ideas page as well, and there are so many brilliant ideas. I love these little boxes. And on the inside it gives you a little bit more information. It tells you it's vegan friendly. It's amazing stuff. I genuinely have used this and loved this for quite a while, but they only had very basic shades here, these sort of browns, tans and whites, but now they're expanding into all of these different colours, so you can see how bright these are, and they just look fabulous. So versatile. If you don't have colours, you can actually colour up. If you have a pale colour, you can colour those up. I've done that before using alcohol markers. Today I'm going to work with the linen coloured Craftex. This has got a really nice texture on both sides, but you can't rip this, although you can cut it. You can cut it very easily, just with ordinary scissors. And you can sew through this, and you can stamp onto this. But I'm going to show you something different. Let me show you how much you get on a roll first of all, because it's quite a lot. It's certainly enough to make several decent sized projects. The size that you get in the big rolls is 18.5 inches by 28.5 inches. So that is quite a lot. I'm going to snip some off because I'm going to start by showing you a couple of different ways that you can emboss. I'm using my Sizzix die cutting machine, and I've got an embossing folder here. This has got a really dense pattern, so it's ideal for demonstrating this. I'm going to pop my little strip in here, and then you might have to play around with the plates because this has got the Craftex is a bit thicker than normal cardstock. I found that by flipping out 1 and 2 and just using the base plate, it works quite nicely. There's our strip. It's got a nice deep embossing on it, and that's just what I need. I'm going to cut this down because I think I'm going to show you 3 different ways that you can make use of that embossing. Because this is linen, and this is a really common colour for journaling and junk journaling, because it looks like it's sort of aged paper. You could leave it embossed like this. I actually think that's completely beautiful, but I will show you a way that you can leave it plain. I'll show you a little thing that you can make where you really it's just as easy to leave it plain. The first way that you can really highlight the embossing is just by taking an ink pad. I happen to be using a Distress Oxide. This is Ice Spruce, but you could use any one that you have, any ink pad. I'm going to run it over the top. I just want to pick up the raised areas where it's been embossed, and this will also help you see the pattern a little bit better. But isn't that just beautiful? I love this sort of stuff. And you can make that any colour you want it to be, so you can make it really individual for your projects. The other thing that you can do, I mentioned that you can colour the Craftex, and in the past I've coloured it using alcohol markers. And you can use your pens to just run across the top and pick up the embossed area. Each different way that you colour this will give you a slightly different impression or effect. With the ink pad you get those lovely swishes and little gaps where the ink pad doesn't quite connect. But with a pen you can be more accurate, so if you want to see the design stand out more clearly, it's easier to use an alcohol marker. This next way is my absolute favourite. I've got a rose gold embossing powder and I've got some clear embossing ink. I'm going to take the embossing ink over the top of my raised areas, exactly as I did with the first piece. I'm going to pop it on my sheet of paper and sprinkle over some embossing powder. Tap away any excess. Keep the rest of your embossing powder by popping it back in the jar. I'm going to hold this in my tweezers because it's quite a small piece, and I'm going to get my heat gun ready. Isn't that just absolutely stunning? Because it still retains the flexibility. So if you're thinking this is lovely, but what about some practical applications? It's going to be a journal. I've measured out the size that I would need to make a small journal cover. I've just used pencil and using ordinary scissors I'm just going to cut this out. I've cut down a couple of pieces. Now I don't want to get hung up on measurements because it will depend on what folder sizes you have for your embossing. But this one I've cut down is 18.5 centimetres by 11.5 centimetres. The reason it's quite small is because that way I can fit most of it in my embossing folder. I'm just working on a standard size. I know not everybody has A4 machinery or A4 folders, so let's just see what we can make with the smaller standard sizes that everybody has. I'm going to pop that into my folder as I did before with the little piece, and I'm going to fold it over. Now I do have a wee bit that overhangs, but because it's only a tiny little bit we can cheat that. I'll show you how once I've made my first pass. So that is all beautifully embossed, apart from this tiny little strip on the end. And the way I'm going to cheat it is I'm just going to pop that little bit back in my folder, but only where the bit is that hasn't been embossed. There we go. We have a slight line down there. I'm not going to worry about that too much because it's even and it looks as if it might be deliberate. I like this colouring so much that I'm going to use it again, but this time I'm going to cover the whole piece that I've just embossed. It gives it a really beautiful damask effect. I'm just letting the ink pad rest on the embossed raised areas. I'm not pushing it down. I'm just moving it. Keep adding ink until you're happy with the coverage that you have. I think I'm happy with that. While this is drying, I've cut down a little piece, a little tab that's about 1 inch wide by about 3 inches long, and I'm going to add some gold embossing powder to this, pretty much as we did with this little experimental piece earlier. Either of these colours would work nicely with the blue, but I've decided to go with a classic gold rather than this rose gold. I've marked on one edge, this is actually going to be the back of the book, this is where we had that, needed to do that extra little bit of embossing, and I'm going to sort of mask that a little bit. I've marked the centre, and I'm going to take this piece and I'm just going to add a little dab of glue to hold it in place, because I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch it onto the blue piece, and I'm going to match up the edge of my gold piece with this little line, then it looks a bit more intentional. This has now been sewn into position, and I've done that sort of sewing that you do when you're fixing a handbag strap, so it's a cube with a cross in the centre. Get your edges all matched up, fold in this piece, because this is actually going to be a closure mechanism. The reason that I'm folding it is because I hate measuring things, and I'm going to put a couple of pencil lines here. I can remove the pencil lines later. I'm just going to do them very, very lightly so that I know where the top and the bottom of my strap will be. I can see my lines here. And I'm going to cut 2 slits. Buster approves of that idea. You can probably hear him in the background. I'm going to make the slits ever so slightly wider than my strap. I'm going to make it about 1 centimetre or 1/4 of an inch wide. So now we have a little tab here, and when we want to close our book we can slide this underneath like that, and that forms a closure. I'm going to very gently use an eraser to get rid of my pencil lines. I always like to give you alternatives where I can, and if you don't have a sewing machine or you don't want to do sewing, what you could do is get a brad, these little paper fasteners with the legs that open up, and you could put one at the top and the bottom. I'm going to turn this into a journal, so I've prepared a little stack of, I've got 4 signatures here, and they have 10 pages, 10 full pages in each of them. I've added the holes, so I'm all ready. The reason I've been able to add the holes is because I make a few of these and I work from a template. You obviously won't have a template, so what I suggest you do, find the centre, let's call that the centre, and then you want to space out your signatures by about 1/4 of an inch. So if this is your centre, you need whatever is 1/2 of 1/4 of an inch, and that will give you 2 lines there, and then you want 1/4 of an inch on this side and 1/4 of an inch on this side. So you work out from the centre and then measure all of that and replicate it at the bottom of your cover, join them up, and then measure in where you want the dots to go. My dots generally go about maybe 3/4 of an inch from the top and the bottom, and then they're spaced out 1 inch apart for the centre, and I have 4 little dots. To create the holes, take a pokey tool and poke through the hole. This is nice and easy to work with, the Craftex. It won't split, it won't rip. You can get a nice little hole. Hope you can see the little tool popping through there. And do that with each of the holes that you've put in place. I will be doing a tutorial, a full tutorial showing you how to make a little mini journal in the future. It's going to be in a few weeks' time. I will show you exactly how to do that. In the meantime, I'm going to keep popping in the little holes. All of the holes are in place, and you can see how evenly they all line up, and that tells you that you'll get a really nice finish on the outside of your journal. I'm going to show you how to sew in one of the signatures. I start from the second top hole, I pop it through this hole, second top hole in the journal, and then because I have a tendency to pull the thread all the way through because I'm a bit of a numpty, I take a little clip and I grab the thread. You don't have to do that. If you're a little bit more aware of what you're doing and a little bit more concentrated, maybe you won't have the same problem that I do. Then you pop your needle through the top hole of your journal and bring it through the top hole of your pages. This can be a wee bit fiddly, depending on how well all the holes have lined up. So we've gone out of that hole to here, we've come back in the top hole. Now I'm going to take it to, I'm going to jump this hole and go into the second from the bottom. Then I'm going to take it into the bottom hole from the outside, in through the page. I'm going to pull it taut but not tight. I'm going to pop it back through this second from bottom hole, and I'm going to bring it back in this hole. When you bring it back in here, make sure that you pull the thread under this top thread. This is the big long thread where we jump the hole. You want these pieces to be either side of that, so that when you tie the knot to complete the stitching, you tie the knot over this long piece of thread. That way the knot won't disappear back through the little hole that you've already made. Never pull your strings this way. Always grab them both and pull them up the way. That way you don't risk ripping your paper. And that's a nice, neat, taut finish to that signature. And I'm going to tie this off with a knot. I just do a double knot, left over right, right over left, I think. And that stops the knot from unravelling, and then cut it loose. So that's how you sew in a signature, and I'm going to finish sewing in the rest. I'm on the last signature. I'm just closing that knot now. And that is our little notebook with the tab that can slip through the little closure like that, all beautifully embossed. I want to show you another way that you can add colour, and this time I'm going to use a piece of the white Craftex. I've got my embossing folder, and I've also got some archival ink. This colour is Buttercup. I'm going to rub the ink all over one side of my embossing folder, and then I'm going to put my white piece of Craftex in it, being very careful not to move the Craftex around too much, and then I'll roll it through the machine. And this way you colour in the flatter parts of your design, and where the embossing is raised up, it remains white. Both of these have turned out particularly nicely. This is the Buttercup, and this one is using an ink called Cornflower Blue, and that's just a beautiful colour. I'm going to work on the reverse, and I'm going to use a little of this glue paste. This is called Yes Paste. It's very good because it's pretty solid, as you can see, and for sticking things like this it's really good because you can apply it with a credit card or a piece of plastic. I'm just going to apply this in the centre, and it won't seep through to the fabric that I'm going to put on the top. I'm not going all the way out to the edges of my piece of Craftex because I'm going to stitch around the outside edges, and I don't want my needle to be going through glue. I've got a piece of fabric that is slightly larger than my piece of Craftex, and I'm going to drop the Craftex on top of it. turn it over and I'll smooth it down, working from the centre to the outside. Some glues, if they're very wet glues, will seep through the fabric and you might get a little patch of dry glue that goes a little bit hard. And it's not a major issue, but it does interrupt the look of your piece, and that's a shame. I got some zigzag scissors and I'm going to cut around the outside of the Craftex pretty closely to the edge of it. I quite like the effect of having a little bit of an overhang, and it does make the final journal look quite nice. I'm going to take this off camera and I'm going to stitch with a straight stitch as close to that edge as I can. This is my cover with some stitching around the outside now. Difficult to show you that on camera. So it will look like that. And I've also prepared a piece of decoration to go on the front. So I've used some lettering stamps that I have, and I've written the word journal. Don't cut down a piece of paper or craft stock. This is Craftex in white. Don't cut down the size of Craftex or paper or whatever else you're using to the size that you want it to be on your finished project. Do your stamping first and then cut down around it. It gives you much greater control, because otherwise the risk is that once you've actually cut your piece, if you start your word in the wrong place, you might find that you start it in the middle or too close to the edge, and then all the letters sort of have to be spaced out, or if you start too close to the middle, all the letters get squashed into the end. Do your stamping before you cut it out. I'm not going to measure any of this because measuring is really boring. What I am going to do is take my little piece and some glue, and I'm going to glue it onto the same fabric that I've used to line my notebook cover, and I'm going to pop it on there. Again, the glue is just in the centre and it's to hold it in place because I'm going to stitch around it. And again, I'm going to take my zigzag scissors and I'm going to cut away around the outside. There's my little detail, and I'm going to glue this down. If you prefer, you could stitch it down before you add the fabric to the inside of your cover, but this glue that I'm using, Beacon 3-in-1 glue, is very strong and it'll do the job beautifully. And it also means that I won't have the risk of stitching showing up or being bumpy under my fabric. And all I need to do to this now is add my little signatures, and that's my book cover. I said that I would show you a way to use this impact, this embossing technique on the Craftex without colouring it, and I think this is a really effective way to do it. So what I've done is I've popped this through the end of my embossing folder, so I've embossed maybe 2 inches, and I'm going to cut a tag from this. I'm not going to assume that you have a tag shaped die, so I'm going to show you what I do. I use a template. This is one that I've made up myself. I like these measurements. This one is 120mm from top to bottom, and it's exactly 60mm across, and then I've cut the shoulders off and popped a little hole through there. And all I'm going to do is draw around this. Whenever I make, if I find I'm making a lot of something, I will make a template for it. And sometimes you don't always want to be dragging out dies and die cutters. This is how my tag looks. I'm going to pop my little template back on top there. I'm going to mark where the hole is. I have a crocodile. It's a very useful tool, and I can't think of an alternative for this. Maybe just an ordinary hole punch for paper. That might do it. And I'm going to use this patterned piece to make a little ring reinforcer. The way to do it is to start with a hole from your crocodile. Start with the smallest of the holes that you want to create. This is a 1/2 inch diameter punch. I use this all the time it's perfect size for hole reinforcing. And pop that through there, ping, everything goes everywhere. And you can see how easily the Craftex cut just with a normal little punch. Let's finish off our tag with some thread. I folded a piece over a few times. So here are the products that we've made today, and these are extra little experiments that I've conducted using the blue, and I've added some silver wax, just rubbing it over an embossed blue piece of Craftex, and the white as well. The white looks beautiful when you just add some extra little fabric inside and add a little tab on top. And I'm going to continue working with these covers, and then I'll add pages and turn them into little journals like this one here. I hope that's given you some inspiration. I hope that you will go and have a little play with this product. I'll provide links below the video as to where you can find it. For now, I'm going to leave you with some close-ups of some of the items that we've made today, along with a little bit of music. And until we meet again, take care.